Welcome to the inaugural episode of Capcom Confidential, the official Dev1 podcast. My name is Miguel Cordy, and I will be your guest host today. Joining me for hosting duties is Mr. David Cockman.
Hi.
Very enthusiastic Mr. Cockman today. On today's episode, by some cosmic irony, our guests are actually the regular hosts of this podcast, Mr. Matt Walker.
That is a wonderful script you've written there, Miguel. Well done.
He's reading it off the cuff.
And
Reading it off the cuff, yes.
Reading it off the cuff.
And Mr. Pete Fabiano.
That would be me, yes. Hi, everyone.
By the end of this podcast, not only will you be familiar with these two gentlemen, who they are and what they do, but you'll also learn a few insider tidbits about how Capcom works, and we hope had some fun while listening.
You can tell that, Miguel's used to writing like syllabi because it's like, what will I have gained from listening to this podcast? That's good, Miguel. Good job.
What are the takeaways, Matt?
I don't know, man.
It's too early for takeaways.
It's actually kind of late right now.
Okay, so this is the first official episode, but last week, Pete, you put up the teaser.
Yes, Matt and I put out a teaser for everyone.
The Pasties of podcast.
Yes, hopefully everyone had a chance to listen to it, and if you didn't, well, it doesn't matter that much because it's a teaser. But just a taste. I guess we're not hosting today, Matt. Yeah.
I don't know how that happened. I was doing my best to keep hosting duties myself.
How did we get forced into this?
I don't know, man.
You guys already failed. You got replaced.
Yeah, we can't even do our job, Matt.
Well, that's usually how it works for me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So
actually, maybe the first thing we should get into actually is what is your job? Because maybe some people know because both of you are active on Twitter and social media and such, but maybe some new listeners don't know. And they're probably all new listeners because it's the first episode. So.
That is a valid point. Excellent. Pete, what do you do?
What do I do, Matt? Well, I am called a producer.
Okay.
It's a fairly new
A development.
development. Yes, new development. I like that. R&D development. Nice bringing it.
I'm done.
But
How did that happen?
We had a bit of a reorganization, and there was a job offer to come over to Dev1, and I took the opportunity, and here I am.
Okay, there you go.
Same with you, Matt?
Yeah, actually, my story is exactly the same.
Well, that was
amazingly.
exciting.
Yeah.
It's almost like the company had a reorganization of sorts.
It would seem that that's the case.
I did say that.
But that also indicates that we did something before this.
I guess that is
Right.
the implication.
Before
We've been
the
here about
reorganization.
10 years or so. Yeah, that's
You
kind
did
of...
work
No,
before.
he showed up. Matt showed up
Hey.
to work.
Oh, okay.
Did I ever look like I was doing work when I was on 7 with you?
I couldn't see what you were
The answer is no.
Well, I think we should probably make clear what did these guys do?
Yeah, actually, I think
Who are
that's a
you?
lot more interesting. Yeah, Miguel. Seriously, man.
Well, thanks to the reorg, I'm now the senior manager of global production, which was actually Pete's previous position.
What is? I mean, I know.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, let's get into what global
And
production
also,
is.
it's changed, right, since
Yeah.
I have made my departure.
Right. So previously, the global production team oversaw, I guess you could say, the overseas production of the majority of Capcom titles. Before we had two teams, the localization side and the production manager side. Basically, the production managers come in at the beginning of the game, even before things get off the ground, to get the pieces in place so we can build a game. And a lot of that is dealing with external partners. Most of them are overseas, hence the global aspect of that.
They
Yeah, but
all
that's-
speak Japanese.
I mean, all right, that's kind of vague. External partners. But I mean, I guess technically, I did talk a little about that on the 8-4 Play podcast, right?
Friends of the show. I'm
Right.
going to take that. from them.
Yeah, the friends of the show. They're actually to me.
The only friends of the show.
They're more than just friends.
Podcasting.
Exactly.
Also rivals of the show.
But I mean,
No. It's an amicable relationship.
in terms of production, though, I mean, yeah, it's very much we come in and we help the team do all kinds of stuff, not just for instance with like 3D assets, helping them get 3D assets made. For instance, helping them find places they can and actually help them get mocap shot, that kind of thing. But then also, like they talked about on the 8-4 podcast with Pete, with like location scouting, for instance. Right?
Sure. I mean,
So-
that's, I think for those who did listen, we're kind of getting into similar territory. But yeah, I would say that we helped out with a vast majority, or anything that was external, in terms of development, looking at, let's say, voice acting or mocapping, as you guys mentioned, or 3D assets or animation, anything that's done externally, we helped out with.
Right. And so, but okay, that was the
Yeah.
global, that was the production side of global
Yeah.
production. But localization seems to be, from what I can tell, more what you guys deal with, right?
Right. I guess you could call it the more quote-unquote creative side
For sure.
of the game's development. If I would put it in a simple analogy, the production side would find a voice recording studio for us to work with and set up the contracts. And the Loc team would be the people who would cast the game. So that's kind of where...
And direct it and make sure it's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
You
so
sound so excited about your jobs.
It's a lot of
I'm
steps.
super excited about it, but I don't have enough bullet points to talk about all the things that we do.
Sure you do. Go. You have 20 minutes.
That's
No,
true.
actually,
That's
it's
true.
boring. You have 20 seconds. Go.
Well, let's see here. Of course, other
15
than-
seconds.
You stop it.
I'm
You
sorry. Okay.
Other than the obvious localization things, which is, text in the game and voices in the game, and then all the menus and stuff like that, I guess we also have some unique body shapes that are a lot of other staff members don't have, so we get to be some 3D models. Yes.
Like
yeah.
I was in RE7.
Like
Yeah.
you were.
That's right. Okay, so basically people just tell you guys to shut up and translate is what I'm hearing.
No. That's the perception.
Right.
Especially if you... Well, we've talked about this before. If you haven't ever worked on games directly, it's really hard to understand what goes into making games.
Oh,
there's
yeah,
not
sure.
there's not a making of DVD that comes with games the same way that comes with movies. It's not book publishing that's been around for like 100 years, and everyone has a vague notion.
It's only been around for 100 years.
For red is
Well,
in
in the
English
current
as
form.
it is in Japanese.
I think he's talking
Is
about
it
the business side of
semi-
things.
The business side,
He
And
knows more about this stuff. Than I do. I don't read enough of the books.
but it's I see there's a lot of misinformation and assumptions about what goes into making a game, and even localization. If someone were to tell me, someone I just met, said I work in game localization, even I wouldn't know what that means because it varies from company to company.
That makes sense.
So with Capcom, our style is we're more embedded with the dev teams. We're working close together with them. So it's not just about taking the text and David has to look at it and say, yeah, this is okay in English, end of story. Like, he's giving advice and feedback. He plays the game even when it's only in Japanese, or even at a stage when there's even no Japanese text and there's just dummy text for all the filler places. And he's already giving feedback on the UI, the layout, the design, everything like that to make it a more intuitive experience, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Because that's what games are. I mean, you want to enjoy the challenge of playing the game, not fighting the UI, not fighting the menus to get into the game and things like that. So all that encompasses localization. And as you guys know, we take it to the next step at Capcom in certain regards. Like many of the Resident Evil games are written in English to begin with, not Japanese. So Pete was instrumental in finding a number of writers for us to work with. And then what they take is translate into Japanese for the Japanese version. So they're actually localizing it into Japanese
Right.
For the domestic market here.
Right. I mean, yeah, you know a lot more about localization than I do. Because whenever people say, "Oh, Matt, yeah, localization," I'm like, I never worked in localization. I have no idea what they do.
Well, actually, Miguel brings up a really good point. It's the whole, there's no real making of, like, for all of game development. And actually, that's kind of what the focus of, or at least what we hope the focus of this podcast is going to be.
Exactly.
Actually bringing in these creators internally and having us talk to them like you guys and Loc, or, we did in the project, well, before this, production management, now moving into being producers. And also, well, I mean, for you, I guess the job hasn't really changed because there's a lot of
Right.
overlap. It's just
Right.
more of a semantic thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like talking to sound team members or getting some of the artists in here, that's definitely something that we want to focus on so that they can tell their stories, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a good segue. And I mean, I think originally we brought Miguel in to kind of like be the shepherd of the conversation to hopefully kind of lead us that way. But since we're already there, I mean,
I can go home now.
you can leave. You've served your beefy purpose now.
No one's going to get that reference.
Once you
Miguel's-
post a picture, I
That's
guess.
right. That's
Miguel's
right.
really beefy. And so there's actually a whole story as to why we call you beefy, too. It's all thanks to me. But we can save that one for another time. To talk about, what
Because
this...
he has muscles.
Pretty much.
There, I saved everybody.
more or
Great,
less.
there goes episode 3.
Our topics are done.
But to talk about like what this podcast is for and what we want to do. I've always wanted to bring our devs to people and like share their stories with people because they're so good, right? Like every day we talk to these people, these amazing people. Even some of you guys in Loke have some okay stories. It turns out.
Well, not mine, but either way, I mean,
Actually,
there's a lot of legends that like walk these halls. Right?
There are,
So, I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
The stories that come from them are crazy.
Right? What we're trying to do is literally bring the devs out here and say, look, we think that these guys, these people, these guys and gals are really cool and they have these amazing stories and we would love to share that with everybody else. So there's a good chance that actually this is going to be boring for a lot of people. I don't know, right?
Well, we should never say that. This is extremely exciting. Always be positive.
Depends on the caliber of the people, right?
All right, well, I guess I'm off the podcast.
Yeah, you're pretty much off by episode 2, I think.
If I make that far, that'd be pretty good. Right? And also helps that, I mean, we're friends with a lot of these people. Like, the reason we have you guys on here is because you're friends of ours. And
Wait. They didn't say they were going to say that.
I thought we were getting paid.
Wait, we're not?
Well, you're getting paid by the company.
I think I got a phone call. Anyway,
And so,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
can have a lot of great conversations, I think, that hopefully other people will be interested in. If not, at least I'll enjoy talking.
And it's all about you.
It's all about me. That's right.
and the devs.
Oh, wait.
And-
Can I-
and-
Well,
and-
technically,
and-
we're all devs, so there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, technically we all
Please,
are.
sir.
Yes.
please. So, all right.
Yeah, the Bionic Commando podcast is a good, I guess, touchstone for what we're trying to do. I mean, Garode, Reedy, and Ben Judd started that way back in the day, kind of as promotion for Bionic Commando, but
Ostensibly, I would say.
yeah, I mean that it was named for that purpose,
Right.
but it really took on a life on its own. It's just a podcast coming from inside a developer and being able to give access that most people don't have normally. And of course, you can't say everything that goes on. There are company secrets and things like that. But I think for the most part, they were, or actually, because Pete and I were on it, we were pretty open about a lot of things. We were able to interview Inafune-san a number of times, different producers. We even interviewed Nakai-san, head of QA, to get the QA perspective, because that's sometimes their perspective is always kind of an afterthought in the whole dev process.
You mean Kobayashi?
Was it
I was saying
Kobayashi?
Nakai-san was the director of...
Sorry, I'm getting my people confused now. We talked to so many people. But
Right. We did talk to Nakai-san as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember you guys had... I know you guys had... let's see here. You had some people related to Ace Attorney, I think.
Yeah,
the time.
and I think what's important too is that we don't want to overpromise. Obviously, we're going to have a bunch of people on. You mentioned we're not going to talk about games, but we certainly will. I mean, we'll talk about the creation of those games and,
Right.
and how what
But
went
it's
into
not
them.
it's not meant to be this PR thing, right?
Well, no, but I don't think we
Right.
need to say that. I think that's hopefully will come out in the way we do this.
We can only hope.
Well, I mean, when you start
For our
telling
sake.
people what something is, I think it loses a bit of value. I think it's more important to just let things happen organically. I mean, honestly,
and go ahead and let everybody down now. So
Yeah.
you don't have any expectations
Well, okay, fair
about
enough.
hearing any
Yeah.
kind of teasers or stuff.
yeah. I mean, well, look,
So we're
Yeah,
not
go
going
ahead.
to tell people how to get the unlimited ammo rocket launcher in RE4.
if you want to tell them how to do that, that's totally fine. Yeah.
We have a tips and tricks section, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, tips and tricks, like,
All right.
like those old hotlines you could call back in the day.
Classified information.
I
Turn
mean,
on your
a
computer.
real challenge is
Type
going to be that a lot of our devs are Japanese, so we're not really going to be able to have them on. This is an audio podcast, so that would require a level of translation. So we'll have to work around those things and
Right.
figure out what we're going to do in order to get their stories out too. So for the most part, we'll focus on English. It's just simpler, easier, and it doesn't break conversation flow like this. And we are kind of going off the cuff, except for Miguel's opening.
It was a wonderful syllabus.
Yeah, but yeah, I think things work a lot better if you do it that way and trying to be honest and just going with things. Having what's kind of important, or actually what I should say is very important, is actually feedback.
Yeah.
Hearing what people want to hear and what. And we have the Twitter now. We have all of these things we can do, all these methods in which people can communicate with
Yeah,
us.
there's been a lot of positive comments in the comment section.
And actually, there has.
Oh yeah, on
there has
Resetter,
been.
man.
Oh,
On
yeah.
Resetter, we've gotten. I was really
Relevant
impressed.
ones.
You know,
Every third comment is relevant.
no, but seriously, I was really impressed. And
Yeah, it was
Pete
really
actually-
nice to see.
Pete messaged me. I got home from work and he's like, "Hey, you want to play some Monster Hunter?" And it's like, "Sure." So we're actually playing Monster Hunter World. And he's telling me about the Resetera thread and how positive it was. And I went, and sure enough, it's amazing and it's exciting to see everybody excited for this specific topic of, oh, hey, we want to show the devs to people. We want to bring the devs to people. And yeah, all the positivity was amazing, right?
Yeah, so maybe we should do less talking about what we want to do and actually do it.
Oh,
There you go.
Fair enough.
Well, then I guess it's over then, because who are they going to talk to?
I guess we're going to have to talk to you guys.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, speaking of World, which all of us are still playing.
Are we finally going to get to introducing David more now?
Yeah,
Oh, no.
I feel bad we left him out of the proper introduction, but David is our senior English editor at Global Production, aka the Loke team.
We need to think of a new title, because that's like 1% of what I do.
It is 1% of what you do.
What, localization or gold production?
Or editing.
Editing? Oh.
I mean, that
Oh,
sounds
right.
like I open up a file and I look for typos, and
Right.
then that's my job.
That's
It's
not what you
over.
do?
I mean, like 1% of my day.
No, so explain more. Because I think when someone hears senior editor, they're going to think you get a book or a wall of text, and all you do is just fix the mistake.
What is it? You dot the I's and you curl the P's?
Well, it's,
No, let them.
it's in the computer, so I don't need to dot any I's or cross any T's.
Oh, that one. Okay. No, but seriously.
So, do you want a daily thing, or do you want like?
I want you to say whatever you think is relevant.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, okay. Like from the beginning of, I guess, a game's cycle, that we get some information about what we're going to do. We get like a huge list of terms. We go through them. We discuss them as a team, and then sometimes we take them back to the director or producer and get approval for them. Sometimes we don't need approval for them, so that just depends on the game or the situation. And after that, we get a very, very, very early version of the game, and we get familiar with where everything is, and we get requests in place, maybe for like debug functions or about the text or a story or the size of the UI, and just go back and forth between the programmers or the UI designers about what our requests are. And then we get a lot of the text. Sometimes we write the text. Sometimes we just translate the text, and then we throw it in the game and see how it looks, and then make adjustments depending on that. And then after that, we keep fixing everything until there's no time left to fix it and polish it.
So how long have you actually been at Capcom?
In February, it's 3 years.
Well, congratulations.
Served it
you.
3 years. Geez.
Yeah. I started on the release of Monster Hunter 4U.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So what would you
It was
say
an
then
excellent game.
that your favorite title, or the title you enjoyed working on most, and any specific story that you could share that would actually be really fun or interesting?
Fun or interesting? Well, the two titles that have taken up the most time have been Monster Hunter Generations and then Monster Hunter World. And I don't know, those are both kind of like top because of just the kind of creativity that we were able to put into it. And yeah, I mean, there's so many good stories about it, but yeah, I don't really have one particular memory, but I'll tell some people a kind of like a little history about my preparing for Gen.
Drunk history?
Not drunk history. It'll be very sobering, unfortunately. So when I came to work at Capcom, I had never played a Monster Hunter before, and I can hear like all fans right now just being like, "Oh my god, what does she know
It's
about
okay.
Monster
This is
Hunter?"
the Dev 1 podcast. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Right. And
I'm just kidding. We love Monster Hunter, obviously. So
And,
you can leave now.
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, and so I had before the project ramped up, I had 6 months to kind of get familiar with the game. So obviously, 4U came out, and so I was playing that like in all of my free time. And when I was not playing that, I was researching everything I could possibly look at with Monster Hunter, whether it was like in our guidebooks or the master files from all the games. And it's not just like, what kind of monster is what Rathalos is or anything like that, but also like how NPCs talk and their character traits and what games they appeared in, and pretty much all history. So I put myself through like 6 months of Monster Hunter University, and then I tweet a meme and somebody fansplains me. How I don't know anything about Monster Hunter.
Whatever it was, you were probably wrong about it.
Yeah, probably.
More than likely.
To supplement what he was saying about his role, I mean, well, because games, as you guys know, it's collaborative, and whatever your role is on the title, you are not just limited to that because you're supporting everyone else who's working on the game. So
Right.
even though he's in charge of the English side of the game, he's helping, say, our French, Italian, German, and Spanish team,
The European.
the European languages, or FIGs, as we call them for short.
The figs. Yes.
Yeah, he helps them because he's the one who gets access to the game first, so he's more familiar with it. So once they start work on translating or editing, and there's always not a lot of time, there's never enough time, right?
There's 400 OKs in the game, and where's this OK appear? Where's this OK appear?
And he's the one to tell them where it appears in the game, so it saves them time on their job.
Yeah, okay.
And like you said, some of the stuff we do is creative. Like a lot of times they come to us at the beginning, and like all that ephemera you've seen in games, like in say RE6 or RE7, like when you're walking in the town or building or whatever, there are posters and things on the wall, and they want ideas for things like fake product names, all that.
Yeah.
We make a whole list. We write up maps and things like that, street names, all those sorts of things. We try to add to the realism. And then, of course, there's just like the basic structure of working on a game and coming up with IDs for each string in the game, things like that. That's kind of the boring side of it, but it needs to get done, or else your game's not organized and you can't work on it.
Right. And even after all the creative stuff and like you have all the text in the game, then you have to go and do all these really technical checks to make sure that like some monster's name is spelled correctly or some place is spelled correctly over like 500 IDs or something like that. So there's lots of really cool like parts of the job, and then there's lots of collaborative stuff, and then there's lots of really like mundane and repetitive tasks, but is a good balance.
But I mean, like, okay, so for Monster Hunter World, for instance, so you mentioned that you guys very much have an influence on kind of not just the text, but like the design of the game, like the UI, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Do you have like anything in particular, like from World, for instance, that you can point to and go like, yeah, this was something that like we gave the Loke team, global production gave feedback on.
Or any game. It doesn't have to be World.
It has to be World.
Oh man, you should ask Andrew.
That's true. That's true. So then Andrew, and also Andrew Alfonso, right?
Yep.
He works on Monster Hunter World.
Well, one change, he gave a presentation at GDC a few years back about the Loke for Monster Hunter 4U. And one simple change, and most people will not notice it, especially if you only play in one language, but when you clear a quest in the game, in Japanese, it's red. The symbol is red. And the way it's designed, it's a nice design no matter which Monster Hunter game it is, but the design actually looks like if you don't understand Japanese culture at all, you're just playing it as a non-Japanese language speaker, what have you, it looks like you failed.
Right, because it's
Actually,
red, right?
Because it's red.
Right.
But in Japanese, if you look at any
Fail.
kinds of diplomas or certificates or things like that, they always have a red stamp on them.
Right.
Whereas we put a gold seal. That's just the difference between, and we, I should say, as an American, we have a gold seal on the certificate, on your diploma, what have you, things like that. So for Japanese, red equals good, as in you completed something. Like you got your doctorate's degree.
Yeah,
There's the
it's
red
just
stamp.
It's the stamp ink, you know.
Well, red usually indicates failure from our perspective. So one thing they did was change it to gold for the overseas
No
version.
kidding.
So that way, gold is we equate that with success.
That's interesting.
So actually, that's a really good segue into, well, how do you guys approach, and I know this has been talked about in many different venues, but specifically here at Capcom, you've now been here over 10 years, Miguel, and you run, well, you've kind of had a hand in localization the whole time, but now you actually run the show. How do you approach localization? Because a lot of people think it's straight up translation. A lot of people will think, well, you just have to keep to the integrity of what's there. I mean, what's your idea behind all that?
Well, personally, from my perspective, because we are part of the dev team,
Right.
that we are helping them make the game. Now, ideally, the director has a vision for what he wants. I think Tokuda-san, director of Monster Hunter World, is a good example. You were with him giving the presentation at GDC this year. He had a vision for the game, and our job is to support that vision. But we have to step in when they're trying to do something that doesn't make sense. They want to name things certain ways. Now, those words don't work together in English, or that's going to be difficult to translate into the 10 other languages you have to translate this game into. So you're going to have to make a compromise somewhere, and you have to point out where the compromise is going to take place. Is it going to be a programmer has to work a few extra hours to get that done and take away from another task, or does the quality go down in one of the other languages because of that issue?
And I would imagine too. I mean, I've always assumed that like you guys don't just point out the things that are problems, but also just this isn't necessarily a problem, but here's actually ways that we can make it better. In this region or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many examples. It doesn't even cross my mind sometimes because it's just part of what we do naturally. And like we get things back from the team, and sometimes they don't even have ideas of where they're going with it. For past Resident Evils, for example, they would just have some creature designs, and I look at that. I'm like, I got a few ideas for these names, and I would present them to the director and discuss why I think they're good names, and we go back and forth. Obviously, they have their ideas too, and you want to make sure you're coming together in a good place. It's personally, I always feel like I'm walking a line, balancing what I'm doing, because you don't want to be the person responsible for the next all your base are belong to us. But
I don't think that's possible.
But hopefully not. But at the same time, there's certain things like I wonder if I had been Loking them back in the day, would I have let them get through? Things we accept now, like 1-up.
Yeah.
If 1-up was created today, I would flag it as it doesn't make sense. But we accepted that as kids way back when. There was no localization. It was just the Japanese, as it was, brought over. And now it's a common term that we can all use and understand what it means. But when it first was introduced, no one knew, per se, what it meant. My parents don't know what it meant, of course, because it wasn't part of the language. But now, as we've grown older, everyone our age and younger just kind of knows what that means. It's even in movies like Scott Pilgrim and things like that. So it does enter the zeitgeist. But you're always wondering, okay, is this notion, is it too Japanese? Is it not easily translatable to the West? Or is it different enough in a good way that, yes, something like this doesn't exist in American-made or European-made games? This will set it apart. This is actually a good thing. So it is a balancing act, for sure.
Yeah, and then, even then, there's a lot of terms that are like, pretty much anybody that's into any kind of media these days, know these terms. I mean, even like what you were talking about earlier with the seal, like quest clear, game clear, level clear. I mean, that's super Japanesey, but it almost everybody understands what that means because we've been used to seeing that so long in video games. But I'm still going to change it when I see it.
Nice.
There's some things too. Resident Evil is a good case in point. Like I always, not Capcom titles specifically, but lots of other titles back in the day, back in Nintendo and Super Nintendo era. The English titles were different from the Japanese title. And when you find out what the Japanese title was originally called, you're like, oh, that's so much better, so much cooler. I didn't actually have that reaction when I found out Resident Evil was called Biohazard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I thought Resident Evil was cooler. Resident Evil means nothing if
Right.
you think about it. It really
Right.
doesn't mean
Right.
anything, but it just sounds cool together. Evil that resides in the house. Okay, I get that. Biohazard to me is a spoiler
I agree.
because when you first play the original game, you don't know the cause. You
Right.
find out later that it's Umbrella. They were for
What
whatever.
spoilers? Come on.
Sorry. Wait, spoiler alert, you find out it's Umbrella, who for whatever God, like, they own an entire city, yet they set up their most important lab inside
This old mansion.
this old mansion. I don't understand that,
Right.
but that's what they did. And as you find out, oh, this was man-made. This is not supernatural. So Resident Evil maybe is not as applicable, but when you start playing the game,
Right.
you don't know that
Right.
to begin with.
That'd be really interesting. We could find somebody that has a story about why it was called Resident Evil as opposed to. I mean, aside from I guess Biohazard, there was like a
There was a trademark issue,
Right.
according to CUSA at the time. Told me.
Capcom, right?
Yeah, Capcom America said there was a trademark issue. I think there's related to a band, a heavy metal band or something.
There is a
There's
band,
a band
and there was
called
one more reason I can't.
Yeah, there's another
but
reason.
It's halfway because of the band. Too.
Yeah, and
Really
so because we wanted to trademark it, so
right.
yeah, we were.
But then
They went through a list. He said they went through a list, like you usually do. Like probably they had 100 names on that list in every permutation, every combination possible, and that was the one that won.
I remember
Zombie Mansion.
on the Bionic Commando podcast, you guys actually went over one of those lists with.
I think it was
Ben.
Dead Rising.
Dead Rising, yeah.
Dead Rising. That's what it was.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting names in that list.
What
Like,
was the worst one?
what was the worst? One was like straight up like zombie something. It was just kind of.
They were pretty bad. There
Yeah.
were some really bad ones in there too.
But who knows how they were even came up with? If you have to come up with a list of 50 names, by the time you get to past 12, you're going to be scraping the bottom of the
Oh, I
barrel.
know. Oh, I know.
So, but okay, so you're the head of localization now. Have you always just done? Sounds stupid. But just done localization at Capcom, or is there anything else that you've done here?
Well,
Like, has that always been the main focus?
that
here
has
now?
been my main focus.
So then-
Within that, I've done different roles, but yeah.
So, what
Yeah,
did you
but, like
do?
every aspect of like the game's development is like touched, kissed,
Oh yeah,
harassed by localization. I mean, like
It is when it's
everything,
stable.
like the audio, the even the Foley or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, like
Art design.
art design, everything has to be like filtered through localization. So I mean,
well, and it's like you guys said too. Like you guys got scanned to be put in different games, like Pete's and RE7, for instance, that kind of stuff. But I mean, all right, so you've always been in Loc then. Did you work in Loc before you got into Capcom?
No, I did not.
All right, what did you do before?
I did do translation, but I was primarily writing textbooks in Japan.
Okay, you were living in Japan, and how did you get into Capcom?
That is an interesting story.
Well, let's hope everyone thinks that.
Yeah, I know. Maybe not so interesting, but yeah, I was working with a friend actually at the time, and we were doing a similar job, and we saw Capcom had an opening, and actually he was looking to transition to something different, something more stable, because we were on yearly contracts. We weren't. It wasn't like we were full-time employees per se. It's a weird legal limbo here, the way they do contracts at some companies. But it's not like they would just fire us on the spot. But technically, we weren't that stable. And he had a family at the time and was thinking he wanted something with more stability. And we saw the opening at Capcom, and he said, "You should apply. You love games." And like, actually, I think I'm going to leave Japan soon because I was thinking I had done everything I set out to do here, so I was ready to go home. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. For whatever reason, I didn't feel like doing it. I'm like, you should apply because you're the one who's looking for a new job. So he applied and he got in. And then 6 months later, he wrote to me and said they were looking for someone else, and he recommended me. So I ended up applying and got the job.
You got the job in Loc, and so what were you doing in Loc when you first got here?
First up was just translation, straight up translation.
You know what you were working on?
Yeah, I originally started on 2 titles, Resident Evil 5 and Mega Man Star Force 2. But Resident Evil 5 was in different stages of development. So what I was working on there was more translating documentation for like the mocap shoot, actor casting, things like that. And then it went into they actually did the mocap shoots. At that time, Loc members didn't really accompany the dev teams to mocap shoots.
But you guys do now.
We do now most of the time,
Okay.
but at that time we didn't. So that was off my radar until they came back with the script. So in the meantime, I had to translate Mega Man Star Force 2. And that was a real learning experience because it was just a huge chunk of text every day, 4,000 characters translating to English. And we had to be done. We started like end of September. We had to be done mid-December and just power through it every day from start to I come in, clock in, just start translating at the end of the day.
Did you have any context for this stuff? Like, could you have
Oh, yeah.
access to a ROM or
Yeah, see, that-
at your desk?
That was the thing. A lot of the games back then, the localization was a post-production. So that game had already been released in Japan. So we
Oh,
had
wow.
the full Japanese ROM. We actually had a dev ROM, so we could do debug features and just skip around and do things
Sure.
like that. But yeah, the whole game was done. But because it was all done and they only had a skeleton crew left, we couldn't change a lot of the UI and things like that. So only
God,
if like
horrible abbreviations.
well, not just abbreviations, but like a signage in the town as you're walking around, unless it affected the progression of the game, we weren't really allowed to change it. So, and that was frustrating for the FIGS members as well because they would only do it once into English if they had to change it, just because they didn't have the resources anymore.
Were there any building floors in that game? Because I know, like, just between the different like European languages, like ground floor and first floor.
Oh, yeah.
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, fortunately there wasn't that issue. But
I learned that for the first time just a couple years ago when I went to Europe on a trip for Revelations 2, man. And I was like, oh my god, they actually call the first floor something different over here.
ground floor.
That one.
yeah, I mean those problems actually are bigger than you might think sometimes because European languages are big on masculine and feminine for all nouns and things like that. So if, say, we're doing Resident Evil, I just say it's a monster in English. That's fine. You know, Chris Redfield says, "Look, a monster," right? The FIGS languages need to know, is that monster male or female?
Wow.
Things
Okay.
like that, because that affects what words they can use, because it changes the structure of them and the conjugation of all the different words. They even English, like the best example would be the English word "you." You could be plural or singular. Without context, you don't know. That happens almost across the board with every sentence for FIGS. So they need to know those things going into it.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, I think things have changed quite a bit. I mean, I don't know how long this podcast is going to go today, but yeah, when things first started out, at least when I first got involved.
Wait, okay, so
Yeah.
So you came in after Miguel?
I did.
All right, you came in after Miguel. In the Loc?
So what happened was, Miguel was actually out of the blue one day. I was living in Tokyo, and I don't know, I was just getting fed up. I always felt like in order to live in Tokyo, I had to keep, getting more and more money. Most of my friends were in finance, so I was around all these big wigs, and I felt, okay, I don't like what I'm becoming, like this desire for this pursuit for money rather than this pursuit for happiness, which I kind of tied together. So I wrote Miguel and I said, I need to get out of the city. I really like it here, but at the same time, I just want to do something different, more relaxed, go back to Osaka maybe. And he just said, I guess the time was right. He just said, well, we're actually looking for a manager. Maybe you were interested in the position. I said, well, I'm not really a Loc guy. I'm more on the management side. So I said, yeah, that's perfect. That's what the position is. And so, yeah, I applied for the job, and I got it. So I came in afterwards.
Who was running Loc before Pete then?
Well, there were a couple people. Ben Judd was originally running it till he moved on to
Became a producer.
be a producer
Right,
of Bionic
Bionic
Commando.
Commando.
Then they moved up one of the people internally. I guess I can say his name.
Yeah. See, why not?
His name is Eric Bailey. Well, he still is Eric Bailey.
He's still there.
Yeah,
He was.
he moved to. He had left to work for another game company right now, and so he's still making games in Japan and still loving it. I see him every once in a while when our paths cross in Tokyo. But yeah, in the transition between him actually hiring me, between when I interviewed with him and when I actually joined the company, he left to pursue other things. And so when I joined, there was no official leader at that point.
All right, there's no official leader. Do you remember what year you got into Capcom?
Yeah, 2007.
What year did you bring him in?
2008.
Eight.
So about a year in between.
And actually, no, 6 months. Like you joined April, March, April,
May.
May. Okay, yeah. So I joined September 2007. So less than a year.
Less than a year.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys were kind of like leaderless, and of all people, you decided to bring Pete in for some reason.
Well,
Okay, okay, you bring in Pete. He's a manager type. What was it like?
Not Pete, you.
It's not the first time I've heard that. Won't be the last. So, what was it like for you getting into Capcom, man? Like, you're like, hey, okay, they're like, hey, we need you to manage these people.
Well, I mean, yeah, I came in for the interview, and it was pretty daunting. And what happened was, I go into this room, and it's a pretty big open space, and there's this tiny desk, and you open up the door, and
So like kind of like a scene out of a movie.
you're kind of like you're in an interrogation room, except you're like way across the side, on the side, and it's an investigative team. So I sit down, and then there's the head of HR at the time, an executive, and this wonderful woman who still works with us, and she was there. And then also one of the editors who worked on the low team, and they all took turns interviewing me. I'm in this corner, and I'm sweaty, and I have to do the interview in English and in Japanese, and they're asking me why I wanted the job, and what qualifications I had, and if I could do it, and how I work in teams, and all these other things. And the one thing I do remember is towards the end of the interview, the executive, he says, "Do I like yakiniku, like barbecue, like Korean barbecue type food?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Okay," and that's how it ended. I was like, I have no idea why he asked me that and where it came from. But after I got in, well, they had a welcome party for me, and they took me to Korean barbecue. I later found out that he asks that of anyone who passes his interview. So if he doesn't ask you that question, you're not getting the job.
So what's his name? So when I interviewed
His name is Mr. Yamashita.
Yamashita.
He's
already have the job you want.
also a good point.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so then I got the job, and it was kind of a scary time because I didn't know, or I wasn't ready to receive kind of the list of demands of the team. I don't know I'm sure Miguel knows this, but I don't know if the rest of the team knows this. But at one point, they were actually considering whether or not to continue the team on. There were only 8 of us at the time, I guess.
8 or 10, I guess. Once
with
you joined,
me,
10,
maybe
yeah.
about 10.
Does that include Figs too?
We only
Including
had one
Figs.
Figs team,
Yeah.
not 2.
Okay, so including the one Figs team, that was
Yeah.
like between 8 and 10 people.
And
Yeah.
then, so I had to go through these lists of documents that I kept pretty confidential. That's right, confidential.
Ooh,
Capcom.
Capcom.
That's right. You just waited. I opened that up for you.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, so the as they like to say in Japanese, the merits and demerits of keeping the team. So I was like, oh, okay, so we're at that level. And it was a
That's
lot
your
of work.
first task when you came to the company.
More or less, it was like, yeah, turn it around kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the
It
issue
wasn't
was,
going to. Okay.
well, the issue was, well, I don't know if it wasn't going too well. Some things were, some things weren't. I
Right.
think the problem is, like, they had this team now, and by the time Pete joined, it would have been maybe 2 years, 2.5 at that point that the Loke team had existed. So they really hadn't incorporated it into their system for developing games. So
It wasn't integrated.
It
We were
wasn't
actually part
integrated.
of the support team. We were not even dev at
Yeah.
that time.
So, I mean, first of all, Loke was considered, for most titles, at least half the titles, it was post-production. Like,
It's like DLC.
yeah, like Mega Man Star Force series, Ace Attorney series. All the Japanese versions, the domestic versions, were created first, and then they're like, oh, I guess we'll do the Loke version now. And there was no support for that. And so, and because it dragged out on budgets and schedules and things like that, it was just viewed as kind of a burden more than anything. And then on the bigger titles, say like your Resident Evils or things like that, I guess maybe they thought we were interfering in some regards with the dev, and I guess there were clashes there because, well, we had a responsibility to make things good in English, and they were doing things the way they wanted to make things, and those sensibilities didn't match up at times, and we're communicating past each other, not with each other, which was the issue. So Pete had to formulate ways to make us better integrated with the dev teams to see. We had to learn to see their point of view too. Like, we were actually kept very separate from the dev side, and we didn't really understand what was going on with them even though we worked in Capcom. But then once our eyes were open to like, wow, these devs, they go through a lot to make these games. Some of them are here till 2 a.m. at times, just trying to get these things done. And I understand, wow, so sometimes they don't have time to worry about whether there's a singular or plural monster in one section of the game, because they're worried about whether that whole section of the game even works in the game.
From my perspective, and I've given talks on this, I think relationships are paramount, right? So when I came in here, it was important to understand not only what was necessary, but also what these people did, who they were, what their expectations were, and trying to deal with them and speak with them. And, then I started talking to sound team members and all designers and producers. And I would say that we were probably at first very close to the producers. Probably, I would say our initial relationship was kind of producer level, at least on my level, and then with the creators on the design side, they had to more integrate on that with that focus in mind, and working with sound, as Miguel mentioned. Now you're doing mocap, and that's of course design related, and you're dealing with sound as well on top of that. So you have to really understand what they do. So a lot of that focus was to say, okay, we're integral and we need to integrate, we need to understand each other. And as we move towards sim dev, which is where we are now, simultaneous development of games rather than an after effect or something that you think about post-production, in terms of post-production, we need to be more integrated. And pushing that focus, I think, really helped in developing those relationships, and there was certain preconceived ideas on both sides, and work styles, and cultural things. And I think once we started to get through all of those layers, there was a better understanding, and we grew from there. And I think once everybody knew that we all wanted to achieve the same goal, which is to make something really special, a fantastic game, and you're never going to truly understand each other because of certain limitations, but we have Japanese speakers there now, have more integrated English speakers and developers from the West. So we are growing and becoming more of a global company. And I think that was always my goal from the beginning. Miguel can probably expand on that in terms of the creative side, but that was always my vision, to kind of integrate and grow in that direction.
Interesting. You talk about the communication, and from my point of view, this is something we was talking about, but just having the difference in language, the Japanese and English, that really isn't the only aspect to it, right? I mean, getting people to understand each other, even if it's just in English, right?
Yeah, because I can barely understand you.
That's seriously.
No one knows what you want half the time.
Well, neither does my wife. Neither does my daughter. Nobody. That's okay. Anyways, it's that being able to communicate like that. People tend to focus on English and Japanese. Okay, because of the two different languages, the fact that they're separate languages, that we're having this miscommunication. It's
no, because I've seen the same miscommunications happen between native English speakers and such. It's not because it's a different language. I mean, that's the first barrier, right? That language, and not just the language, but the culture as well. You can't understand the language without understanding the culture. But then there's the idiosyncrasies of individuals. Some people get orientated on one aspect of something, and they can only think in those terms, and they're arguing past the point. They're not saying what they really mean because they're not good at explaining, simply just not good at explaining.
And that's my problem.
Yeah. So
very, very useful skill as a producer, Matt.
Yeah.
Seriously. So, all right, but that's what Capcom was like, and then you came in, and how did you build the team up to what it became? So right before we had the reorg where you and I became producers, there was, how many people were in global production? Between 20 and 30 people.
I think it's 30.
Almost 30, yeah.
30 people with not just the low team, but then also global production, which we haven't even gotten to how did that become a thing? We're still talking about just low, right? So there's a lot in between there, right?
Sure. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that probably just goes with all the things that they keep asking you, we need to talk to this team, or we need to talk to this company. Can you do this for us?
So it was
well, I think we started with Dead Rising way back when it was Blue Castle Games. One of my staff, actually, he was already working on Dead Rising 2 before I even entered the company or even started here. And there was a lot of back and forth. And he started off as doing a lot of interpreting, but as things grew, we realized that the job that a lot of us do, you can't just be an interpreter because you're just a mouthpiece, and if you just put words through a funnel and regurgitate them, that's really not going to get you. You have to kind of be an active participant, and I think that's how a lot of us grew. So we had one of our guys working back and forth at Blue Castle, later on became Capcom Vancouver. He ultimately went on to become a producer there. So you could see that the role in and of itself started to grow out of what we were doing. And I'll spare everyone the details, but yeah, it just grew with milestone reviews here, working on how to certain design choices, working with teams, looking at schedules, looking at money and budgets. And so when external development started to grow within Capcom, that was a role we took on. And so we started to grow a lot in that area as well. And then the production management team was formed, and they grew, and they were working on, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, working with a lot of external partners to do various facets of development.
Can I mention something about that guy who worked with Dead Rising? His name is John Earhart, right?
Sure.
Thank God you finally said it.
Yeah.
That was driving me nuts.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. A little known secret. That guy almost never localized any game.
Really?
Yes, this is a little known fact.
He was on the
he was on the
Secret,
he was on the
Behind
Loke
podcast.
he was on the Loke team, but when he started a couple months before I did, and he finished up the linguistic testing on Devil May Cry 4. Basically, actually at that point, overseeing more of the FIG stuff for that. Andrew was the one doing the straight up Loke testing on the game, so he was kind of just managing that. And then he got involved with the DR2 stuff, which, because Blue Castle was designing and building the game, there wasn't any straight up localization of game assets. And so the only one I think he really did was We Love Golf.
No kidding.
Yeah. Everything else after that was really, he was doing a lot of translation work, but it was all communication based, documentation and things like that. So I used to tease him about that. Like, you came into Loke and went out of Loke with almost never localizing.
Wow.
Well, technically, I've never localized anything either. But I mean,
Right.
my
He
case
came in
was a
as a
bit
manager,
different,
yeah.
Right.
But he came in he was hired as a Loke translator, and he almost never did that. Straight up Loke translation. He did a lot of translation for DR2. A lot.
Right.
From the emails to interpreting in the meetings to the reams of documentation going back and forth between Blue Castle and Japan. So there was a lot of work involved there. Not to say he didn't do work. Maybe he didn't. I didn't.
I mean, I guess his passion was always on the production.
Yeah, but it's just kind of funny. He entered Loke and never actually localized a game, except for We Love Golf.
We Love Golf. That was a Capcom? There's another golf game in it. Is that not?
That's Mina.
Oh,
Everyone's
yeah.
Golf.
Which is
That's
now,
a PlayStation.
now been renamed, right?
Oh, did they rebrand it?
I have a feeling it's called We Love Golf. I might be crazy.
No,
The one we made was We Love Golf because it's a golf game on Wii. But,
Oh.
so it's WI. Yeah.
Yeah, you get that?
Yeah, the Wii with the
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Wait, and actually, now that I think about it, you brought Pete.
Yeah.
Means you knew Pete before Capcom?
Yeah, I've known Pete since college. Since my freshman year.
What year was that?
Last century.
I would say so.
Yeah, that was back in '94, I believe.
I graduated in '96, so yeah, '94.
Yeah, '94 I entered college. Yeah.
Why is that relevant?
I just think it's interesting that like
Been 24
you
years.
knew
the
each other
the
since
years.
college.
Why is it relevant?
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
obviously them knowing before.
Yeah.
I just want to show how old they are.
I'm not even old, except for the fact
Yeah,
that I
once
graduated college when I was starting high school.
I don't know how young you are. You're just a baby. Come
Right.
here. Come here.
Once
hey,
once
don't-
Pete posts the picture to go with this podcast, everyone will think we're the youngest.
That is I'm shade, but
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I knew Pete a long time, and our paths are always crossing. Like, it's not like we were trying to do the same thing, but we both had an interest in Japan, which is what brought us together in the first place. So, because he was 2 years ahead of me, he was one of the first people to go to Japan as an exchange student in a long time, because no one had gone.
8 years or something.
8 years or something like that. And because of him, I also found out I could do that as well. And so you had to be a junior before they let you study abroad at our school. So 2 years later, I went to the same school. And while I was there as an exchange student, he came back to Japan to work. So
Right.
it was, and then after I graduated, I followed the same path. From there, our paths diverged a bit, but yeah, he was in Tokyo for a couple of years as well. But then, yeah, it's just a coincidence.
So
So
back to the States.
what made you decide of all people? They're like, oh, we need someone to run the load group. You're like, I'm going to talk to Pete.
Well, because he was my friend, and I
Ah.
knew he could do it, and he had the experience because he was working for a company that dealt with localization and
Right.
translation in Tokyo. So he already had the experience as a translator and a localizer in the industry. Yeah, and he had worked as a producer for Fuji News in New York for a couple of years. So
Yeah.
he had experience as, in my mind, that equals management experience as well. And actually, he was running accounts and projects at his job in Tokyo. So they were looking for someone more on the management side, not just a translator, right?
Right.
And so I'm like, well, that's a lot of skills that are hard to come by. And probably the key skill in the equation that was Pete at that time was being able to talk with Japanese staff, which was kind of lacking on our side.
Right.
And so that's why we needed someone with that level of experience.
So Pete, I mean, I've always just assumed, but now I'm curious. Did you ever actually loc a game at Capcom? Though? I'm assuming
No.
not. Okay, I
Nope.
didn't think so.
Never.
I
He
didn't
came
think
in as a manager, so
Right.
yeah.
so.
I mean, he's overseen the loc of
Okay. Oh yeah.
a lot of
Oh, of
games,
course.
but yeah.
Of course.
And not just like that's kind of another interesting part about your job too is that not just because you're managing the team, but you also gave a lot of feedback. We all play the games, we all check the games, and we're all given feedback. So there's lots of things in the games that were changed because of some of the things that you saw. And
Because I'm a pain in the ass.
well, I think that the problems or the things that you wanted to change were very valid. So
Oh, thank you.
that's a pain in the
Well,
Well,
ass.
you're
like-
not normally this nice to me.
We would message each other. Pain in the ass is coming to your desk. Watch out! We're not getting paid for this podcast.
PETA. You just have the code name PETA. PETA.
All damn.
Does that mean that you're about to tell us a story about something that Pete said that contributed to Monster Hunter World?
Why do you keep bringing it back to World?
I don't think I
No?
don't think the changes that we no,
You
know,
I don't think we can talk about.
I thought I'd try.
You know, I've listened to other podcasts or seen, interviews with different people from movies and what have you, and creative endeavors, and especially like they'll say, like, when you were making that 10 years ago, what did you think of this? And the person's like, I don't really know. I'm like, how can you not remember those things? But now, after having lived it, like, there are certain things I do remember. I did this, and I didn't do this, or this person did that. But a lot of times, because it's so fast-paced and the turnaround is so quick, you'll throw out 3 ideas, 2 of them get rejected. Then Pete will come in and come up with 4 more, and maybe they'll take 1, they'll reject the other 3, but then at the end they'll take the third one because they actually like that or it fits better for some reason. And you all are just trying to make it better, like Pete said, and then you don't remember who did what at any given point in certain things.
Well, it should be a collaboration anyway, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You're looking at it, we're all supposed to be working together. And it's hard because sometimes egos do get involved or people want to have ownership, and I understand that. But it's all, I guess, part of the communication process and going through things. And being a manager can be difficult because I think it's more being a leader than being a manager, and I think those are 2 different things. I think it's great if they overlap, but they don't always do so. And yeah, it's hard to lead, but communication is a big part of that.
I mean, I agree. It's interesting because getting back to the topic at hand with localization.
What was the topic of
Now
that?
Monster
Localization.
Or we can talk about Monster. It's okay.
This is the Dev 1 podcast.
That's true. and production and global production. I mean, going from that team of 10 people to 30 people.
Right.
Like, how did you convince the people above us? Because we've already discussed here that, like, it's hard to get people to, especially people of a different culture, to kind of understand where you're coming from. And it sounds like when you got into Loc, it was a point where people were going, look, we even need a Loc team, right? Like, how did you go from that to, okay, we're gonna establish this as global production. We're gonna have 2 separate teams in it. We're gonna build it out like this, and they're gonna have all these really integrated roles. Like, it just seems like there's so much in between here and there that, like, could be covered, And God knows if we probably went on for too long, it'd be another 3 hours. But
I think it has to do with a lot of just I think I tend to think high level. I'm not like these guys. I'm not the kind of guy who just gets fixated on the details, although sometimes I do, but it really depends. I'm more about looking at things from, okay, how can we improve at this level so it all trickles down, and hiring, because if you have the right person for the job, that makes things a lot easier. I let people do what they're supposed to do as long as they understand what it is they need to do. Right? So that's part of leadership, and then on top of that, making sure that I had the right proposals in place to report up so we can make changes. I mean, it's something as small as I saw that we were moving towards a sim dev process, and so I wanted to hire more FIGs, as they mentioned, uh, translators. And originally, the entire team was opposed to this. They did not like the idea of having extra people there. They didn't think that we'd need them. And I'm talking about the Lope team itself.
Right.
They're like, oh, I don't need support. I'm fine. They're not going to have enough work. And I knew what was coming down the docket. I knew what was coming. And I proposed up and said, here's why we need this. Here's our schedule. Here's what we're looking at. Here's how things are going to move. And eventually we did get 4 more people. So we had one new person per language, and it was necessary. And now, well, even sometimes we don't have enough people, right? Well, I can't say we because I'm no longer there, but Miguel doesn't have enough staff. Same in English as well.
Yeah, the games get bigger and more demanding as we transition to games as a service kind of model. I mean, Monster Hunter was, in terms of true text volume, Monster Hunter World is not the biggest, but because it's the first Monster Hunter World that we released globally simultaneously.
Oh, that's right, Monster Hunter.
Yeah, it was the most challenging, and
It still
because
has more text than the Bible.
yeah, it's unbelievable, and like we're still up, as you know. There's title updates still coming and things like that, and we're still working on those things, and even little minor elements like updating the online web manual, the website, things like that. So it's never ending. There used to be a clear demarcation between the start and end of a project, especially when it was post-production, like Mega Man Star Force. It started in September, ended in December. That was it. End of story. But now the games are ongoing. The support for them is ongoing. So it's almost never ending. And now that means we're going to have to evolve even further. I don't know where we're going to be in the next couple of years, but how many members we're going to be as languages gain importance to Capcom in terms of their global strategy. Are we going to have to bring in more than just FIGS members? Are there other languages we're going to have to bring in as well? So, yeah, I don't know where it's going, but yeah, we'll have to keep an eye to that.
I think you're saying that you're hiring. Are you hiring? Are you hiring?
It's not a hiring
Who
podcast.
are you looking for? Go on.
Wait, what's
Actually,
your
it's a
email
good
address?
opportunity.
What's your
if
email
you want
address?
to, anyone out there, are you hiring? Because if you are, this is probably a good opportunity.
I mean, we are frequently looking for new talent. So if you go to the Capcom hiring page, the homepage, it's in Japanese though, but the specific job openings for our team are usually posted in English. But if you go there, keep your eye there. We do put out postings for new positions all the time.
I think we could probably go on forever, but I think we're going to need to wrap this up. It's
enough,
been
yeah.
like,
We've
what,
wasted a
20
lot of
hours now?
All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of people's
melting
time.
in here.
All right. So shall we go to listener questions?
We
Oh
have
wait, no, it's first episode. There are no listener questions.
I was
So
going to say.
But to that point, Miguel, I think we're playing with a lot of formats. We're going to try a lot of different things. And we do want listener feedback. So if you go to our Twitter account, which is what, Matt?
At dev1_official.
Is that right?
That is
Oh,
correct.
okay.
If you go there,
One is the Roman
please
numeral.
drop us a comment. And or you can leave it right on the webpage.
A
Capcom.
podcast relative comment would be welcome.
I don't know what you're driving at because that's all I'm asking for. But yeah, that would be the most welcome. And hopefully next time we're on air. Or wait, can you say that anymore? Man, I'm old.
You are
Next
old,
time we
that's
go live, is
Yeah.
that how you say it?
next time we drop a
Yeah,
cast,
next time we drop one of these casts.
true. Right, that's right. Or you can also email us at capcomconfidential@capcom.com.
That's right. We have an email.
That's right, we have an email address.
could you give us that address again?
capcomconfidential@capcom.com.
And
Relative questions, please.
and you guys also have your own Twitter accounts. If you log in.
Do we have our own Twitter?
I guess we do, Matt. What's yours?
Mine is at Gypsy Otoko.
Mine is at P Fabiana. Miguel?
I'm at Miguel E. Corti.
And you?
Wait, what's mine?
You're Izo
Yeah.
Yude.
Oh,
Come on, man.
But I mean, man, if you say ISO, nobody's gonna know.
No,
How do you
it's
spell
not-
that?
spell
Oh
it.
God, it's I or A I. Oh, thank you. I don't even know. I just know. Oh, okay, yeah. It's at IzoUde. So AIZOU or YURE.
What does that even mean?
Oh man, this is another one of those stories about like you have some really terrible screen name when you're young and stupid,
Oh, yeah.
and then like you just used it so much that you keep using it. So like when I was much
Like,
younger, and I was like, "Oh, I love ninjas and samurais. I want a cool Japanese name," and I opened up a dictionary and I was like, "Oh, Izo. Wow, I know a ninja from an SNK game that has the name Saizo, so I'm gonna be
Hey,
Izo."
are we allowed to talk about them?
Yeah, that'd be good. Not Hanzo?
Well,
No, Hanzo was
I
cool.
wanted something unique. You
Oh,
know?
Hanzo's not unique.
And
I
then
love Hanzo.
but the great thing is like way back in like MySpace, Izo is actually like something else in a completely other language. I think it's
I have no idea what I was doing.
yeah, but like well in Japanese it means the simultaneous feeling of love and hate.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Really?
Izo. You know, the
Oh,
conscience.
man.
Oh, look at
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's done.
Never heard that word.
That's fun.
But anyway, like in some other language, it's just like a bunch of bands have that name. So I was like, oh, I need to make my MySpace. Wow, that's all.
Who's?
My
Yeah,
Twitter.
so what's your Twitter account now?
Izo Ure at Izo Ure.
That's interesting. Miguel,
AIZOYUREI.
how did you come up with your Twitter name, Miguel?
Oh, well, I figured, what is my name? And could I use that as a Twitter handle? And I could, so that's what I did. Yeah.
I'm sure. Okay. So we hope you'll join us next time. We're hoping to go live around June 25th, depending on your part of the world. And it'll be post E3, so hopefully we'll have some interesting content from the show. Matt, you want to go ahead and take us out with some music? No, I just wanted you to cue the music.
Oh, right. Okay.